Hey, and here we go. Welcome to human reproduction. When you heard in Biology 110 that we were going to be studying reproduction, you probably thought we were going to be studying this and not DNA and not meiosis and not mitosis. Well, now we finally are going to get to the discussion of reproduction in humans. So let's start though with this idea. Let me show up here. How you doing? Let's start with this idea that males and females are kind of similar. You're thinking, Mr. B, you're not paying attention. No, they're not. Biologically, they sort of are because they both have roles in producing, storing, and delivering gametes, or sex cells, to the fertilization event. So we talk about males and females both having gonads. That is, they have organs that produce gametes. Males obviously have the testes, females have the ovaries. There must be a systems of duct or tubes that actually transport and move the gametes from one location to another so they can get close to each other. And then there must be structures that facilitate copulation. That is, that will allow there to actually be sex so that sperm can be deposited near an egg. So I get that males and females are different. I get that. But biologically, they have a similar role, at least at this phase, which is to produce, produce and deliver the gametes, and ultimately to get them close to one another for fertilization purposes. So we're going to start with a simpler gender. You can make your own jokes at that point. Let's just look at the basic features of males. Obviously, you'll do much more with this if you take A and P, but let's start with the idea that the male gonad is the testis. Males have two testes that are actually going to be suspended below the body cavity in the scrotum. And why they're suspended below the scrotum is sort of an interesting idea. If you're a male and you've ever taken a bad grounder playing baseball, you probably know that's not really a good idea to have the testes below the body cavity. But the only way to actually have proper sperm production is for the temperature of the testes to be a little bit lower than if they were in the body cavity. So by being in the scrotum, by being a little bit lower here and not up here in the body cavity somewhere, it actually allows for proper sperm production temperature to occur. Men that spend a lot of time in hot tubs or spend time riding bicycles with those tight shorts may actually have lower sperm counts. The production of the sperm has to, once they're produced, they must move through a system of tubes. They will move eventually through the urethra. The urethra is this tube right here. You see just part of it here through the penis. So that is going to be ultimately the final destination, or the final pathway in males is to pass through the urethra. And then the penis is going to contain erectile tissue. Let me get rid of some of this. You see all these little lines here, little hatchings, trying to show you these are chambers. During sexual arousal, blood fills in the penis faster than it leaves, causing it to become erect and causing it then to be able to penetrate the female to actually deliver sperm into or near the cervix. So that's the basic anatomy here. I'd like to zoom in a little on the testes and just talk about what happens in here. In these tubes, these are called seminiferous tubules, these yellow tubes here, these yellow tubes are going to be where sperm production actually occurs. Seminiferous means to bear or to produce sperm. So this is where it's going to occur. So within each of these little tubes, these coils, you're going to have the production of millions and millions of cells. Eventually, and let me switch colors here, eventually these sperm are going to move from the seminiferous tubules through this system of curly tubes, if you will, to the tail of the epididymis. So sperm that are mainly mature are going to be down here in the tail, and it can take 74 days for a sperm to actually be started in here, to be worked on, to mature, to move its way through the epididymis, and to be here kind of stored, ready for an ejaculation to occur. So that's the sort of a long pathway for sperm to get here. During ejaculation, we're going to see the sperm are going to continue to move up through this tube called the vas deferens, and we'll talk about what happens to them in a moment. The other thing that's produced in the testes, you really don't see it here too well, but there's a group of cells that actually produce testosterone. Testosterone, of course, is the male hormone. It's triggered, the production of it's triggered in part by hormones produced in the brain, but testosterone is going to be important for influencing the production of sperm. And it's also going to be important, excuse me, it's also going to be important for some what are called secondary sex characteristics, which we'll get to in just a moment. So if you were to look a little more carefully at what happens inside the seminiferous tubules, we're kind of now deep inside those yellow tubes that we just saw. You notice up here you see a cell that's labeled 2N. Don't really worry about why you see a couple cells up here labeled that way, but 2N represents, it's sort of a genetic shorthand for saying that means that we have 2 copies of all of our chromosomes, and we know for humans that means that we have 46. So some of the cells are going to go through a division to where they're going to produce what are called stem cells, and other ones, are going to produce this series of progression of divisions. So from a cell that has still 2N, we're going to eventually have one cell division here that produces 2 cells, each of which is N. Okay, N means that each of these cells only has 1 copy of the chromosomes, so now there are 23. And what does this mean again? Remember, when we're saying that a cell has 23 chromosomes, it has one number 1, it has one number 2, it has one number 3, one number 4, all the way through one number 22, and then in this case, either an X or a Y would be its, sorry, can't write with the mouse, that would be its total of 23. There would be another cell division that's going to occur with each of these. Ultimately, we're going to produce, these 4 cells. These become spermatids, and then eventually they mature a little bit more and become sperm. So in this process that occurs in the seminiferous tubules of the testes, we're going to get 4 haploid products, 4 haploid cells. As you recall from class, these are all going to be genetically different from one another. And just to highlight this difference here, oogenesis, the process that produces eggs, only produces 1 final cell. And you're thinking, how can that be? Because even mitosis gives you 2. We'll consider that in the female video coming soon. But the other thing to mention here, of course, is the process is continuous in males. From the time they start puberty to the time that they die, they carry out spermatogenesis. Females, again, are a bit different in this regard. They're actually going to start meiosis as a fetus. They'll stop it, they'll continue at puberty, and then they'll stop it for good at menopause. But for males, the process is continuous and ongoing from puberty until death, even though the quality and the number of sperm may change over time. So what's a sperm cell actually contain? The part that we're focusing on mainly here is this. This is the nucleus, and the nucleus, of course, contains the 23 chromosomes, kind of like the whole thing is a missile, and this is the payload. This is what it's trying to deliver, is the 23 chromosomes. The acrosome actually contains a series of enzymes which are useful for penetrating the egg so that we can get the whole sperm into the egg and deliver the payload, deliver the chromosomes. The mitochondria, as you recall from earlier biology, mitochondria are associated with energy production, and what's going to happen is the mitochondria are going to use the sugars that are nearby the sperm cell to produce ATP. ATP is the energy molecule that's going to cause the tail to whip and allow the sperm to swim. So everything here, the centrioles are not that important for our purposes here, but everything else is really kind of a slimmed down, skimmed down version. There's not a lot of extra parts here. The sperm cells are among the body's smallest cells it produces, but are very vital for delivering this set of chromosomes within the head. So this slide looks pretty involved and looks like there's a lot of stuff to it. We're just going to focus on the main point here, which is the pathway of sperm from the production to how they leave the body. So once again, we're going to start in the seminiferous tubules that are in the testes, the sperm are going to eventually make their way to the epididymis, and they're going to be stored here until there's sexual arousal and ejaculation. In the event that there is, you're going to have smooth muscle contractions that are going to start to squeeze the sperm through this tube, through the vas or ductus deferens. You see it here. Um, the sperm are going to make their way around the vas deferens, and then eventually they're going to be deposited here into the ejaculatory duct. It's sort of a holding station, sort of a mixing station, because we're going to add some other things to it. We're going to add from this gland you see here, from the prostate gland, we're going to add some secretions, and from the seminal vesicle here, this lumpy gland, we're going to add some secretions. So when we talk about semen, semen is not just sperm. It contains sperm, but it's also going to contain the prostate secretions, and I'm just going to say plus some seminal vesicle secretions. So when we talk about what is semen, semen is actually a mixture of different secretions plus sperm that's going to be made and stored in the ejaculatory duct. Now, during ejaculation, all the semen is going to be ejaculated through the urethra, which is going to travel through the erect penis and out the body. Now, just to mention one more gland over here, the bulbourethral gland is this little gland right there, and that gland actually makes a lubricant for the head of the penis. It also helps sort of clean out and neutralize some acidity inside of the urethra prior to ejaculation. The urethra is shared by both reproduction and the urinary system. During sexual arousal, what happens is there's going to be a little sphincter here that sort of closes off, so urine can't pass from the bladder into the urethra, and therefore, and I'll switch colors here, and therefore then only sperm and semen can pass through that way. Okay, I do want to add this idea that at ejaculation, about 500 million sperm are going to be ejaculated and released into the vagina and near the cervix. Why so many? You would think we don't need to have 500 million, that one would do just fine. Well, the problem is that most sperm are going to be killed when they enter the vagina. Some sperm are going to have some structural problems. And in fact, only about 200 or so of the 500 million actually get close to the egg. This is why we consider males who have only 20 or 30 or 40 million sperm per milliliter of ejaculate to have a low sperm count. And again, saying that someone has 20, 25, or 30 million, and that's low, that seems kind of funny, but a typical male may have 80 to 100 million sperm. So in 3 or 4 milliliters of ejaculate, then there's going to be possibly 500, even 600 million sperm that are going to be released. And even then, there's not a guarantee that one of them is going to actually reach the egg. And finally, what I want to do is close with just this idea that testosterone in males does more than just drive sperm production. I think we tend to think about spermatogenesis as the most important function. I guess I just switched to a more masculine color here. Spermatogenesis is driven in part by testosterone, but testosterone also is going to influence the male brain development. So if you have a fetus inside the uterus and there is testosterone available, it influences the brain to be a little bit different than that of the females. And once again, males and females are different. We know that. But even at the brain level, there are some noticeable differences. So that testosterone does help produce the genitalia, and it helps masculinizes the brain. Then we associate certain secondary sex characteristics with males. For example, the pubic, axillary, and facial hair. Their deeper voices with the larynx. The bones tend to be denser. The skeletal muscle tends to be a bit thicker. This is all due to testosterone, and testosterone also boosts the metabolic rate and libido, that is the sex drive. And finally, just as a sort of a weird trivia thing perhaps, females produce androgens too. Androgens are also essentially male hormones. They obviously don't have testes, but they produce some androgens in their adrenal glands, and we know that females who actually have adequate levels of androgens, it actually does influence their libido, their sex drive, and their interest in sex. So androgens are sort of an interesting hormone that they actually have a similar effect in both genders. Okay, that wraps it up for males. Next video on the females. Thanks.